Welcome to the Anti-Architect Podcast. I am your host, Christian Giordano. As president and owner of the architecture and design firm Mancini Duffy, I am driven by a quest for learning and radically changing the architecture industry through tech-first innovation. With this podcast, I am hoping to improve the industry that I am so passionate about by taking a critical look at how architects work with their clients and, in turn, how our clients view us. It is my goal to showcase all of these experiences, good and bad. Was it the architect or the client or somewhere in between? I aim to bring my audience new voices from around our industry, interesting people with diverse backgrounds. Through shared experiences, stories, and projects, my hope is that we can improve our profession. Hello, Anti-Architect Podcast listeners. I'm excited to have these next two guests, Jeremy Jennings and Brian Hackathorn, the co-founders and co-CEOs of Jabbrrbox, as my guest here on the Anti-Architect Podcast. Jabbrrbox is a connected ecosystem of on-demand private workspace available in public spaces such as airports, hotels, commercial hubs, and retail outlets. Really the next generation of the modern phone room. These guys have some amazing clients like the NBA, Indeed, Audible, GM, and many airports nationally and now internationally. Jeremy Jennings is a seasoned executive turned entrepreneur with over 25 years of experience in the fashion, retail, and commercial interior industries. He is a graduate from the University of Albany-SUNY. He was a principal with several commercial furniture dealers in New York City, Workwell Partners, and Empire Office, which is how I met him. Jeremy has a passion for technology and how it can evolve the way people work. Brian Hackathorn has also worked in the commercial furniture world, but also as a designer for several architecture firms. He was an associate principal at Studios Architecture, where he helped lead the design for several technology headquarters such as Shutterstock, Dropbox, and Mashable. His work has won many awards and has been published countless times in Interior Design magazine. On a side note, Brian's wife Hannah went to school with my wife for interior design at the School of Visual Arts, and Hannah worked at my firm Mancini Duffy a while back. They have a beautiful daughter, Alexa. Boys, thank you both for agreeing to be here on the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having us.
Christian.
Yeah, definitely. So this is the first time I'm interviewing two people at the same time, so we'll have to figure this out here as we go.
See how it goes.
But so let's start a little bit about, kind of each one of you, and I'll kind of cycle back and forth. Jeremy, why don't you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and a little bit about your childhood?
How long is the podcast?
As long as you want.
Exactly. I went to school in upstate New York. I was born in Taos, New Mexico, and had moved around a lot of different states prior to going to school. Moved into New York City right out of school and went into the world of retail. Actually started as an assistant buyer in the executive training program at Lord & Taylor, worked my way up to buyer, and eventually became essentially a brand manager, launching a private label men's sportswear for Lord & Taylor. Tapped at 25 years old to develop this program and got to travel around the world with two designers and a project manager. Pretty amazing experience.
Very cool. And Brian?
I was born and for the most of my life raised in Iowa, primarily living in Iowa City, where the University of Iowa is. So I grew up in a college town. My background, my mother worked in real estate for the bulk of her career. And when I was in high school, married a gentleman who is a design build contractor. And that's really where I developed my passion for design and found my way into interior design school in Chicago after spending a few years at the University of Iowa and really found my calling and passion.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense then. So Brian, what did you do as a kid growing up, and sort of were there any hints that you would become a designer specifically? I know your father in sort of that world, but...
Yeah, so certainly growing up in Iowa is a unique experience. Definitely lots of ways to get in trouble, and maybe ways that those in the urban settings cannot find. But no, I was a free roamer, very active youth. To be perfectly blunt and fair, school was not one of my primary focuses. So I was not one of the most studious kids, but I was a lot of fun and very active and enjoyed a lot of sports and everything else. Once I got into college, I found my calling for school and really what I enjoyed doing. But prior to that, I guess if there's anything that really led me to design, my mother for a while ran a decorating department in a local construction lumberyard, if you will.
Oh, wow.
And one summer, I remember back when there was these huge volumes of wallpaper books, I had to go through with a highlighter, or not a highlighter, a blackout marker, and hide all the order codes from anybody who'd go in and see the book that they liked and would want to go try to buy that wall covering from a third party and not buy it from the lumberyard. So I created this whole coding system that my mother would know what every page and what every book was and black them all out so everybody had to buy that specific wall covering from her.
Oh, that's funny.
So so it was a very long summer, but my mom always had a passion for design or decorating, I would call it more so. And that was probably how I entered into the path of design. But truly, once I started building custom homes, is where I really found that true passion.
Oh, wow. Okay. I remember those wallpaper books. My mother used to go to the same thing, like a construction store, and check them out. You could actually borrow them and, kind of lay them all over the house. I think that was the only way you could figure out what wallpaper you wanted, not like today with the internet. So, Jeremy, you studied at the University of Albany. What was your intended career path kind of as you were studying there? What did you want to be?
It was interesting because as Brian was just saying, kind of his passion stories, I started thinking through the different things I did before school and during school, and it was always very interested in business models and to see how things changed and evolved. I think my first kind of entrepreneur journey was probably around 7 or 8 years old. Starting, I remember I was arbitraging candy on the school bus. I would buy it from the store and then mark it up and then try to sell it on school bus to my friends. And then I started taking cinnamon sticks and making them, toothpicks and cinnamon to basically white label my own product. And I think that carried me through. When I went to school, I was actually a double major, both business and Japanese.
Oh, really?
And really, it was funny. I at an early age, I skipped a grade. I'd always been involved in AP, gifted and talented, and I just never really felt challenged, I think, in school. And I remember my freshman year, I took a Japanese course, and it was the first time I felt like I understood math very easily. Always I could see numbers and kind of just understand them quickly. I could always understand economics and policy and social and very quick. But when I was challenged with Japanese, it was a newfound, it was like hitting a brick wall, and I really liked it. So it was just that passion for learning something new. I put that together with business, and obviously that led to a path of retail.
Right.
Just kidding.
So can you still speak Japanese?
Once in a while, after a couple of sake bombs, yes.
Oh, nice. That's impressive. I knew you were a smart guy, but I didn't realize Japanese is a whole other level. So that's impressive. So
unfortunately, I don't get to practice it too often. Brian's seen after a couple of sake bombs that the Japanese and some of the Spanish get mangled together. But yeah, all throughout school, I put myself through school. I had a lot of different types of jobs. Waiting, bartending, but also, I was the president of the Interfraternity Council at Albany for a while, and did a couple of different things where I was always trying to put together businesses and models, charities. I just found a passion for kind of being able to understand both sides of the table and putting it together. Wow. Retail wasn't really a calling, but it was kind of that same, understanding of business models. I wanted a platform to learn more. And when I fell in love with retail was that it was really just whether it was a product business, you were dealing with a bunch of different stakeholders, and ultimately you learned to put the customer first and and see the impact of what you were doing through the customer's eyes, and think about pricing and placement and marketing and all these different components. And it just kind of like sparked something. And then from there, I look at my professional path, and it was always related to a business model and iteration and trying to become either more efficient or effective.
Yeah. And so my wife's in the commercial furniture, office furniture world. And we always joke around that, at no point is your career aspiration to be, in office furniture, right? But there is, I could spend a whole, years long worth of podcasts interviewing some of the most successful, entrepreneurial furniture people, from dealers to, reps even, and the way that that's all shaken out. So what made you take all of that business acumen and the retail experience, and how did that evolve into commercial office furniture?
I'll give you a 30-second version. I basically lost a bet.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And honestly, not that far from the truth. After Lord & Taylor, I went to Gap Inc. From Gap Inc., I went to Macy's, and I'd always worked for public companies. I had an entrepreneurial itch, and I always felt like I was an entrepreneur in corporate clothing. A friend of mine had actually started a commercial furniture dealership in New York. And we were at a barbecue, and he talked about commercial furniture. And honestly, I didn't know what, certainly knew what a desk and chair was, but that was about it. But very quickly, I learned a little bit about the commercial furniture dealership model, and essentially how they were repping these major lines. And at the time, they come to a crossroads where they had just assumed a new major manufacturer line. And needed kind of like a C-suite business person to come in and run it. And at that time, I was like, I wanted to do something private and entrepreneurial, and something that I could have equity in and be an owner. And it just kind of fell together. And what I didn't realize is, going into, and this is 15 years ago at this point, the design and construction industry, and the layers upon layers, some of which are really good and there for a reason, and some of which are just, have been ripe for disruption. And I think I saw the opportunity of the disruption early on without understanding probably all the layers. But that was kind of the transition into furniture.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And there's still plenty of room for disruption in that industry, and not only the whole, real estate, architecture, design industry for sure. So Brian, you get your interior design degree. And you start out sort of, let's call it the more traditional path, working at design firms, and ultimately you make your way to New York City. Tell me a little bit about the various firms that you worked out, and then ultimately how you meet Jeremy.
Yeah, so I'll step back real quick. So I went to design school in Chicago, which is a great place to learn about architecture and design. For sure. But after growing up and living in the Midwest, I was tired of the cold. So the first place I went was Phoenix, Arizona. And right out of school, I initially started working with a residential architect, designing multi-million-dollar homes. This was back in early 2000s, and right when the housing market kind of crashed early on. And only did that for about 6 months, and then realized, well, most of my schooling was in corporate work, so should I leave the residential side, which when I was in high school, I built custom homes for my family and really enjoyed that, which is how and why I really went into residential architecture.
Sure.
But then once that happened, when I lost that job due to the markets, I joined a commercial firm in Phoenix and worked there for about 3.5 years. And my career progressed very rapidly, very fast. And I was going to become partner way sooner than I wanted to be. And I really didn't want to be locked down in Phoenix. So I'm like, if I'm doing so well here, I may as well hop on a plane, go to New York, and see if I can make it there.
Right.
So I did just that. I didn't have a job. I didn't know really all that many people in New York City, and showed up. And initially, I did join a couple friends who were working with an architectural firm, and I just started working just part-time and interviewing. And I ended up landing at a really great small firm, which ultimately that's where I met Jeremy. called Stylander Design Group. And it was just two of us. And we were located down off of Wall Street in the IMP building, the white building on the tower at Pine Street, which was a great building to be working in. We did most of the interior fit outs in that building as well as other buildings in the Wall Street area. And it was a great education and foray into the New York City scene. And the largest projects that we had actually done for QBE and reinsurance downtown, Jeremy, when he was with Workwell Partners as a dealer, was awarded that furniture project.
Okay.
And that's actually how we met.
Okay. And then you went on and you did work at Workwell for a little while, correct?
Yeah. So part of joining a two-person firm, I didn't have a great network of people. I didn't really know a lot of people. And once I got to know Jeremy and the guys at Workwell, I'm like, this is be one, great learning experience to learn more about furniture. But two, really a great platform for me to get out and to meet other designers and firms in the New York City market. So it was really dual purpose. Learn from the guys and help them, but also get to know the market of New York City, meet other designers, and get more involved in the community.
I love that. That's a really interesting way of getting to know the various firms, sort of coming at it from that side, right? And getting in there, meeting people. And then from there, you decide, okay, well, I like studios. I'm going to go work there. You do something very rare. You leave sort of the furniture or the non-design side and go back into the design side.
Yeah, certainly for me, the passion play was not furniture, and it really was a stepping stone. There was a slight break from New York City in between that. Hannah and I had left New York for what ended up being 10 months. Huh. We had a grand plan to move to South Korea. And once we left New York, we were in Iowa City and got married as a stopover. And we were supposed to go to Seoul shortly thereafter. And she freaked out. She's like, I can't do this. She's like, you're going to hate it. You're not going to understand the culture. You don't speak the language. We're going to have to stay with my family. She's like, you're absolutely going to be miserable. And I don't want to be contributing to that. So she's like, we're in Iowa. Let's try it out. When I was there, I actually got a job at a design and engineering firm and was leading their interiors department because I was the only interior designer working there, which was also a really great experience and met a lot of great people there, learned a lot in my time. But after 10 months, we both said, it's time to go back to New York.
Nice. And so you're working at studios and you worked there for quite a while, right?
Yeah, just over 4 years.
Okay. Yeah. So you're there. And then I remember at one point, probably in early 2015, you came to our office. It was probably one of our like social things that we were having there when Hannah was still there. And you kind of showed me a sketch of Jabbrrbox and, you know, kind of this is what you guys were thinking. And then I think Jeremy and I had met up at some point. And so I'd love to talk about, you know, what is Jabbrrbox and tell us a little bit about it.
Right. Why don't you continue on with the studio's lead-in?
Yeah. So I guess to stop back to the origins of the story of Jabbrrbox, in between meetings, I was often faced with that dilemma that everybody was faced with. Where do you go? You could jump back on the subway and head back down to Soho where our office was, or try to grab lunch or something else. And there's really no great spot to go and be productive in those short 30 to 45 to 60 minute time frames. And I happened to be going from the Grace building to another building over by Grand Central and came across one of the POPs, privately owned public spaces, an interior arcade, and took all my stuff out and was trying to work. And certainly within that moment, you're also wanting to people watch because there's so many different people from different walks of life, different countries, all kinds of different people coming in. And whether they're trying to have lunch, whether they're having a social gathering, you have people playing chess off in the corner. And I'm just watching all these people interact. And then I saw these two construction workers come in and slide a table away from the floor to find a buried floor box to plug in their cell phones to try to get some power. And security quickly came over and said, sorry, guys, you can't be using the power here. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. So as I was trying to be productive, as I was watching other people try to be productive, I didn't have Wi-Fi. It was really before 5G and LTE, so the service wasn't great on my device. Really started thinking about how can people be productive outside those four fixed walls of the office that I was designing for at the time. where can people go on the go and be mobile? And really the original ideas of Jabbrrbox in the modern day phone booth came to me in that moment.
Wow.
And I got really excited. And I started writing down notes every day, and I was sharing it with Hannah. I'm like, what do you think about this? She's like, I would use it. I'm like, I would totally use it. So a few weeks go by, and Jeremy and I, obviously this is after I'd worked at Workwell and I was at Studios at the time. He and I would get together and have lunch and talk about leads and all those things that you do in business. And he's always an idea guy.
Yep.
And he had rattled off about 10 different business ideas that he had that day. He's like, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? I'm like, some are okay, some not so okay.
Some of them are still very good, by the way. just so we're clear. Some of them are very good.
And that day I'm like, you know what? I have an idea I'll share with you. And really I'd gone through and gave him that whole example and my whole thoughts on the business. And he immediately connected and identified, certainly as somebody who's even more mobile than I was at the time, and being throughout the city.
Wow, that's amazing. Jeremy.
Yeah, no, I still have that list of ideas. I think using the idea muscle and writing down 10 ideas a day is how we keep creative and how we keep learning. But when Brian shared that idea, it was literally a light went off. And it was, I think the timing, I had just been introduced to WeWork, and they had just started up around that time. And I made some friends over there. And at the time I was starting to do some work with Serendipity Labs and Industrious, and the flexible kind of like space was like co-working 1.0 was just really starting to happen nationally and somewhat internationally. At the same time, I've always been very kind of community-based, like loving like Zipcar and different like sharing programs and crowdfunding and all this stuff. And when Brian talked about this, it piqued an interest. And I remember taking the train home that day and just writing down like, modern day phone booth with Brian, and then like, this idea of like Zipcar for space. This, we call it a business model, but it was probably more of a cocktail napkin at a time. And just this idea of like short places to drop into work, community-based, pop in, pop out, have the tools you need to be productive, on demand, reservable, and all these ideas. And really what Jabbrrbox is today was kind of the same idea that was genuinely put together a few years back. So it's interesting to see how this, like the idea that I think the beginning, this, formal thesis was around technology has facilitated mobility, but physical infrastructure hasn't supported that mobility in an efficient and effective method. We fast forward a few years and COVID happens. Yeah. And the great work from home experiment happens. And we can all agree, I think we can all agree at this point that working from home is fine. In the short term, it's still viable. But I'll probably have a dog start barking or my kids barging in during this call. And it's not, productivity is okay, but it's not desirable in the long term.
Agreed.
And I think while the office is extremely important in the way we work, and the office is not going away, and it shouldn't go away. And for all the reasons that we know, like talent attraction and retaining and teams and serendipity and collaboration and learning and development. But at the end of the day, most people don't want to go back to the office 5 days a week, and working from home 5 days a week is not the idea. So this hybrid model has really come to life. And, this, our thesis 5 years ago, which is now called work from anywhere, has populated. Yeah. So it's funny how that full circle, the timing is more relevant and appropriate now than ever before.
Yeah, I think the market is essentially come to you at this point, which is definitely where you want to be. And so how old is Jabbrrbox at this point?
It depends how you count.
Yeah.
Well, that leads into my next question. So go ahead. Sorry.
No, the initial idea is eight plus years now. The original idea came just shortly after Alexa was born, my daughter.
Okay.
So I spent a lot of nights and weekends working on it while she was up in between feeds. And it was actually one of the best times to start a business because I was always up and I had a huge amount of thought time. So a lot of notes and a lot of everything going down on paper all throughout the day.
That's great. And so when do you guys say, F it, we're quitting our day job and, we're going all in on this thing and this is going to be our primary, vision and focus and thing that we're doing for, we're going to make this a real company?
Yeah, I'll start and give my side.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So Shutterstock was one of my clients in New York City, and we had moved them into the Empire State Building, and they were quickly outgrowing the space that we initially designed for them. So they decided to go out for RFP for another floor, and they were interviewing us at studios as well as other architectural firms. And as I was in pitching for the expansion edition of their space, they, as a client, were sitting there at the table describing what they wanted in this space. And the gal who was the lead, as I'm sitting there, said, and I want these Jabbrrboxes on the floor plan for my users to have space to go in for private phone calls. And the only person sitting in that room who knew about Jabbrrbox was me. I mean, she had obviously heard about it, which actually goes back to Jeremy because he was already trying to pre-sell product and was going through his network. But I'm sitting there pitching a project and somebody's saying they want to use my product that they don't even know is my product. And I'm like, it may be a bit of a conflict and it's probably time that I transition out of design work and really focus on Jabbrrbox full time.
Wow. And Jeremy?
I remember that point it was a pretty funny moment. I remember Brian after calling and he's like, you know how we're doing nights and weekends? We might want to start thinking of, we've always seen this as a very, very big business, as a scalable business, solving a global problem. I mean, the reality is that people need privacy. And I think the model that we've built out and the experiences that we offer within the box, the places that we can activate, the way we work today, it's a big, big addressable market. But when Brian called me that day, I'm like, yeah, I think it's time to go all in. That was a really interesting time. And then, so I think that was, say, probably 5 years ago, right around that time period. And we started, the idea was that we deploy these privacy pods in different public spaces. And because of, originally we thought, hey, let's take a furniture product. We approached many of the furniture manufacturers, just between our combined relationships. And we said, hey, you guys are making like phone booths. Like we need some modifications. We want to integrate some technology and access control and integrate payment. And we had this idea about what the inside is. And frankly, none of them were that interested in it. They just saw their four walls and that was it. Mm-hmm. They wanted to be inside offices and that was it. And we were like, no, we want to put this in Grand Central Station. We want to put this in LaGuardia. And then literally, I remember going back to Brian. I'm like, I don't know what we're going to do because he was like, we can't use that product. It's not designed and engineered for public space, health and safety, durability, construction. Imagine taking a phone booth and like putting it in Grand Central Station. Like it'll fall apart. We'll end up getting lawsuits, and then we'll be figuring out our next big idea. And I was like, well, I'm not really sure what we're going to do. I remember this clear as day, and Brian's like, let's just build it. I'll design it. I engineer it. And I'm like, you are batshit crazy. I was like, are you crazy? And then he's like, no. He's like, I've been working on sketches. I've been working on designs. Like, so Brian, to his credit, designed it, engineered it. We had some mutual relationships that we were able to source the product and get it built and manufactured. And, we actually sold product, physical product off a rendering before it was even made.
I remember that. Yeah, well, I think, Brian, what's so impressive, because listen, as a designer myself, I have a million ideas and I'm always sketching them up and drawing them up, but never do I take that leap of actually saying, okay, now I'm going to, get this product manufactured. There is a huge leap from there. It sounds, well, it's really easy. So how the hell did you figure this out? How did you get, who makes this thing? Where did you, where does it come from? Like, how did you even find those people? It's like, Phil Knight from the founder of Nike? Like he just decided one day he was going to go to Japan and start, making sneakers in Japan and bringing them over, right? It's basically the same thing for you, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And fortunately for me, having built custom homes throughout my teens and part of my 20s, I had a really good understanding and grasp on how things go together and materials and materiality and what really needed to go into it to be successful. So immediately I knew I wanted steel. I wanted to powder coat it so it could be any color. I wanted to make sure the inside could have multiple different colors, and really thinking through what is the designer and specifier going to want. And then once we really narrowed down the materiality, started really just doing an online search for manufacturers that could actually take part of it and that we could source it all and put it all together. Oh. And initially that took us up to upstate, up in Rochester. We found a metal shop, which is really part of a co-op where they did metal work, their neighbor did paint, another guy did hardware. And we tried to source as much of it out of one co-op as we could. And it really got us through our prototypes and truly the first units that we actually sold to a client. It wasn't the right sustainable path going forward. Our costs were extremely high. So we knew we had to refine and trim everything down and reduce costs. And after that, found another gret partner, which we can go into if we need to.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about it. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we went from Rochester to Milan, Italy. So we made like the biggest jump you could make. It's like, all right, we did good enough, right? We made a really good, solid product. It was like a tank. I mean, it was steel on steel and super duper heavy, heavier than it needed to be. It certainly built more solidly than it needed to be. And through relationships, Jeremy had introduced me to an amazing metal and glass shop in Milan. And certainly didn't help. It's like, okay, so I have to go to Milan and meet them and do a factory tour. Like, let's do it. Let's go check it out. And, right. They had an amazing vision and immediately connected with our business idea, our product. They loved the idea of scaling, and they truly saw the global aspect of the business. So from personality, capability, and everything else, they were a really great partner for us to truly go into our first manufacturing lot. They are so bespoke that it actually became a bit of a hurdle. Okay. The product was beautiful. It was flawless in the way that you'd expect an Italian product to be. But again, our costs were probably a little too high. Our costs to get product into the country were kind of obscene at the time. Mm-hmm. But we had a beautiful product, but we knew we had to continue to iterate and refine, which is really how we look at the entire business. Iteration is key for everything that we do. Design is core to every theory and thought within the business, and every part of it is just iterating and growing every day, every month, every year that we've been in business. It probably drives Jeremy a little bit crazy because things are so fluid, but that's truly how I feel that's how we found success. And I think that's how we'll continue to find success. Wow.
Christian, have you ever heard the term, it is what it is until it's not?
Yep.
That's what I hear a lot from Brian. And I'm like, are we pencils down? He goes, yeah, it is what it is, of course, until it's not. And then
So you've had, I mean, at this point, you're all over the place. Tell us a little bit about where Jabbrrbox is. And then Jeremy, for you, while Brian's doing the design work and you guys are figuring out how to manufacture this, you're out selling this thing.
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, really, we really pushed the furniture because that's what we had to push, and that's how we funded the business. It was a great cash flowing way to not only fund the business, but we saw it as essentially kind of a marketing Trojan horse to be able to speak to enterprise about what their problems were around mobility and outside the office. What are the things that they might want inside the office if they had mobile workers or if they had travel in between sites or cities or countries. So it became kind of almost like an R&D effort. So selling the units by day and then trying to figure out, where we can activate and what the model is going to be for the public units. Truly Jabbrrbox, and this is kind of the can pitch, but Jabbrrbox is a technology-enabled network of on-demand micro workspaces deployed in public spaces to give people the privacy and tools to work or relax anywhere. So thinking about that as kind of our North Star, it involved not only just, getting product out the door, but it involved what is the financial model? What is the consumer enabled technology? And this is before even, talking about the technology piece, which, Brian and our CTO, Andrew Southern, have done a remarkable job of designing first and foremost, and then implementing. And it sounds like you guys have, Christian, it sounds like you guys have, really taken a technology forward approach to architecture. And that's kind of the way that, build the vessel and then start filling it in with technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you guys are everywhere at this point, right? I mean, tell me about where you are with Jabbrrbox.
We are on the precipice of greatness. So we see the ability to go in a lot of different places. What we've designed in an ecosystem is we wanted to go after aviation first. We see the airport as a core use case and demographic of the consumer needing privacy on demand and privacy, technology-enabled privacy that's reservable. So today we're live in 7 airports domestically. We're getting ready to go into probably close to another 18 airports by the end of the year that are in some form of contract process. We're doing that, in fact, with a channel partner in aviation in North America and the UK. We're starting to look at really real estate asset classes that we can enter into. So we're already live. We've had a pilot in the Chicago Merchandise Mart for the past 2 years in partnership with Tornado. And now we're starting to see, we're having, developers, asset owners, mall owners, like basically any kind of real estate vertical reach out and say, we need, something like this because we're being asked, where do I go for Zoom calls? Is there anything that's private and reservable in my space? Obviously, the advent of flex working and hybrid co-working is rampant throughout, every real estate asset class. And Jabbrrbox becomes that connected digital and physical ribbon between the spaces. So there's a lot of things in the works. This is a great time to be part of Jabbrrbox, and we're growing. So I'll leave it there. Brian, do you want to add anything?
I'll add one more quick thing. So certainly the technology in the back end is hypercritical to our success. From the management and monitoring our units, it's also allowed us to bring on assets outside of our own ecosystem. And I'll use this call to announce, if you log in and download our app, you'll see that there are 7 Staples stores in the Boston area now on our app, where you can actually book the podcast rooms that they have included within their co-working space.
Oh, wow.
Again, is in 7 stores in the Boston area. So we're now bringing on assets outside of our ecosystem that we're partnered with other stakeholders, where we're bringing their products into our ecosystem.
That's great. Yeah, and we touched on this a little earlier about COVID, but I see very much like you guys do. The office isn't going away, but it is going to change. And the idea of being able to jump on a video call. So for me, right, it's one of the things that I struggle with as, one of the owners of the business and my clients is taking part in client meetings, that are, kind of anywhere and everywhere, right? And so I've found that what's beautiful about COVID for me is that I can jump on a video call now and I can kind of go from call to call, whereas opposed to before, I would have to say to the client, well, I'm not going to be at your meeting next week. I may have to miss the week after that, and maybe I'll come once a month, basically. But now I can jump on these calls. So as the office evolves too, I think that sort of the mobile ability to jump on a video call is really going to be key from everywhere. So I think you guys are perfectly poised. I even think in the educational world, there is that ability for teachers too. At my kids' school, when the teachers got to jump on a call with a parent, I've noticed that if there isn't a conference room or anywhere somewhere that they can have a quiet conversation, I've seen people jump into closets or around the corner and they're standing there with their phone. And I think this ability to have a video call in private, read somewhere as I was reading about Jabbrrbox more that, it's like the introvert's dream is the Jabbrrbox, right? And in a sense, I get that, because really what it is you do want privacy with these calls. And unlike the open workspace where you had a phone call that you would take out in the open work, video call is very different, right? You've got to concentrate. You've got to watch the people in front of you. You are trying to have a real meeting at that point. It's not just a phone call. And I think you guys are in a great position for that throughout kind of every industry. So it's impressive. I'm always impressed by you guys.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, one quick point to as you're talking about different verticals, and this is directionally the way we think about kind of attacking the problem. You start thinking about maybe non-traditional spaces, and non-traditional means of whether it's higher ed, and you think about use cases on campus. And whether it's studying or job interviewing or having that, that call with a family member, having to do, have some me time. There's so many different types of use cases and areas. We think about hospitals and the fact that someone might be we actually just had a call with a friend of ours and advisor that they were in the hospital for weeks, and their wife was actually at their side, but still had work. And the wife was like a business development person that was always on the phone, and there was just nowhere in the hospital they could go to have that privacy. And inside the box, we always talk about productivity, privacy, and wellness. And in those three modalities and use cases, there's probably another hour of podcast, so I won't go into them right now. But I think that the more people think about you can be productive anywhere, the more that you need privacy and the tools to enable that productiveness.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love the architecture profession. There are so many wonderful people, so many interesting, innovative, and smart folks. And we get access to people that most never even have an opportunity to meet in person. I have worked with Bob Iger, CEO of Disney, Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan Chase, John Foley, founder of Peloton, and many more legends. There is another aspect of architects that fascinates me. How do clients view us? How do they work with us? Those that work with architects either have a wonderful experience or a pretty bad one. Let's continue to listen to the lessons they've learned. And now back to the episode. So part of what we do here on this podcast is we take a critical look at how architects work with their clients and how our clients see us. You've both worked with many architects, either directly or indirectly, and now as a supplier, a vendor, entrepreneur. So I'm a little bit, I'm interested in your take on this, and it kind of varies, I guess. So Brian, you've worked on some successful projects as a designer. In your opinion, what do architects do well, and what do they do wrong?
Tough question. I think if you look at the profession overall, I definitely see, obviously, the great need. I have a huge amount of respect for everyone working in the architectural community. I am a bit biased, of course. Mm-hmm. But no, there truly is a need for professionals. And going off your question a little bit, one of my pet peeves is how TV and reality TV today seems to make everybody feel that they can do anything. And it's really diminishing the role of professionals, whether that's architects, whether that's interior designers. It could be your mechanic. It could be anybody who thinks they can now go on YouTube and learn something and they don't need to hire a professional. So I continue to be and will always be a huge advocate for architects. And I think I've worked with great ones. I've worked with not so great ones. So you're obviously going to find that spectrum of people within any profession. But overall, I think architects, designers, the entire profession is very much needed and something that people should look at with respect. And probably for me, practicing, the amount of times that clients spoke down to us in the room and didn't really value us for the profession and services we're providing. It was really hard when that's your passion. You're trying to deliver the greatest experience in space that you can for that client, and they just don't respect you because they think they know more.
Yeah, wow. That's well said. I agree. So, Jeremy, what annoys you about architects?
Very good answer, Brian. Very good. I think this is probably true of a lot of professionals, and I see a correlation between architects and doctors. Architects are usually very good at, multiple things, but their core strength is usually, in one perspective. What I've seen in the past is sometimes architects, much like doctors, they operate out of a certain side of their brain and maybe have a hard time seeing other perspectives. The best architects that I've ever worked with ask a lot of questions and actually listen. I think architects sometimes will have I not to offend anyone, because I think you either recognize that you're this person and you probably already have heard this before, or you recognize that you're a good listener as well. I think understanding kind of all the perspectives in the room, because as the professional, what I find is usually, especially in the architectural setting, like they give the best advice and they definitely know the right thing to do. And they're very authoritative, enjoy telling people what to do and very good at it. But sometimes understanding all the perspective and stakeholders at the table and understanding, maybe digging deeper than just, I think fact finding can sometimes be a challenge.
Yeah, I thought that very well said, both of you guys. I appreciate that. Since you've both worked on the furniture side, I just kind of want to throw this out there. How do we improve that relationship between the architect or designer and the furniture dealer, right? What don't we really understand as designers and architects about the furniture dealer side? And either one of you can answer this.
Very loaded question.
Yeah, I will start. I think as I was wrapping up my time at studios, there was a shift happening within design where we as design firms, our fees were getting slashed. We didn't have high budgets to be doing all the different things on a project. And so we started leaning on the dealers and their reps much harder than we ever had in the past. Meaning, whereas we would be going through and finding inspiration images and products in the design level, a lot of times that was getting pushed down to the dealers. So I think at that point, there became a little more respect from the design side to the dealers, whereas in the past and maybe prior to that, dealers and the people working at dealers is a very thankless job. And it's probably one of the problems that I had while working on the dealer side is I felt like I was never appreciated. That's not true of every designer that I had worked with on a project. They recognize the late night deliveries and everything else with the setup of a project. But oftentimes you're the last one hired in. You're kind of the last one out. You're somewhat of an afterthought of team member. You're never fully brought into that web of being really core to a project. So it was very thankless. So I'm in one way happy to see that design firms are now leveraging people in dealerships to help them. And I think it's also allowed dealers to go out and hire better people as well. They're seeing that demand and they need to respond, because if you're keeping the design firms happy, you're going to continue to be recommended for projects.
Absolutely.
And when I worked in the dealer, that was really one of my primary roles, was to go out and be that liaison between the design firm and to make sure they're getting all the things that I would have expected as a designer they were also getting in return. And I think that was truly lacking in the industry when it came to dealers. And I think that is better now. Having that mutual respect is very important.
Yeah, one of the things that's come up in this podcast a lot about, whether it's talking to engineers or architects or any other kind of person that's part of this profession, is the idea that we all really have to work together as a team. And kind of the earlier you are made a team member and you work together, the smoother the process goes. And I think technology kind of helps that along as well. And that's one of the things that we're doing. And obviously that's also one of the things that you guys are doing. So I think the more we can all get on the same page, we can actually move the profession forward, and be friendlier and able to accomplish the things that we set out to do, all on time and on budget, and make our clients, as happy as possible. So, do you ever think there's a time where the furniture dealer goes away and it's all just sort of like an Amazon kind of thing, and it's just distributed that way?
I think the model continues to change. The advent of direct to consumer is obviously kind of upended the model. The older days of dealerships and kind of the opaqueness and murkiness on pricing. I mean, you have an artificial list price that's usually double whatever someone's buying it for, and the dealership is getting it for a certain percentage. Like, those days are kind of going away, which I think is a really good thing. I think that, to your point before, the only way that actually the project and the client and all the stakeholders and all the professional services are satisfied is if there's trust and relationship and built on that team. And technology becomes a tool to enable that trust, which ultimately leads to better outcomes for everyone. It leads to, whether that's quality of profession, monetary compensation, just respect in the job, everything else. I think the dealer role continues to change and pivot, and it varies so much by market, frankly. It's probably one of the things that you're finding out as you talk to different people in different parts of the country or in the globe. It shifts so much. I think the need for a middleman between a manufacturer and client will continue to change. I don't know if that'll ever go away, but I think the shape of it changes, the function.
Yeah, absolutely. So, listen, I could talk to you guys forever. So last question for each of you. So bringing it all back around, if you had to do it differently as far as your career is concerned, what might you have changed? Brian?
Ooh, probably the best way for me to look at that is as my daughter's now 8, I spend a lot of time thinking about her future. So that's probably more important to me than redoing my life. It's getting her the right path to do hers right, and maybe avoid some of the pitfalls and things that I didn't do properly. We, having 2 designers in the family, the one thing we always do when she moves a chair or redecorates anything, we're like, no, don't become a designer. It's the first thing that comes out of our mouth. And I guess if there were one thing that I wish I would have done differently in my career, and one thing that I want to instill in her is the importance of finance. And to get her set off early and understanding the importance of money, investing, and really setting herself up in life, because her biggest passion right now is horseback riding. And so she's chosen a very, very expensive sport to start at a very early age.
Yes, it is.
And if she wants to continue it when she gets out of the house, she certainly needs to be able to afford that on her own. So I think the financial aspect, I wish, going even back to schooling, I wish students of my age growing up had more education in finance along the way. And I think that's one spot that I'm hoping that she will find more education and tools along the way as she grows up.
Yeah. I can't believe she's 8. Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Every day, man. Every day.
Jeremy?
I think it's always a funny question when someone asks like what you would do different. Frankly, there aren't many things I would do different. I don't really have any regrets. I feel like I've always had a bias toward action. I think I would actually just move faster, frankly. And because I think you fail fast, you fail forward, whatever the ism is of the day. I think you just have to move quickly, you commit, and mistakes are always going to be made, but those are the learning points. I tell my kids, we don't fail. We either win or we learn. And I think that's just a, approach and kind of paradigm of life today. And every generation says things move faster and get more, the amount of change in the last 5 years versus the last 50 and everything else. That's not going away, and life isn't going to get slower. Everyone has enjoyed, I think, if you had a perspective of COVID as the gift of time, you've enjoyed this downtime. But I hope this gift of time never comes again in our lifetime.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. That's great. So Jeremy and Brian, you've been featured on CNBC, the New York Times, and Forbes. I can't thank you enough for being my guest here on the Anti-Architect podcast. Great conversation. Thank you guys so much for your personal stories and to sharing the vision of Jabbrrbox. To see and read more about Jabbrrbox, or just go and purchase one, you can visit their website at www.jabbrrbox.com, and I'll spell it JABBRRBOX.com. So thank you guys. I really appreciate it.